Okay, to start out, I have an image of the Grand Canyon, which has a pretty clear foreground, midground, and background, as well as a lot of depth, so I could have multiple midground and background layers if I wanted to. For this tutorial, I'm just going to focus on this area here, which is the foreground. This bench is the midground area, and then the back plateau and the sky as the background. Before I start working with the pen tool, I want to make a reference layer for myself, and I recommend doing this since it gives you a plan on how to split the layers apart. I'm going to make a new layer, and then I'm going to go to the brush tool, or you can press the letter B for a brush. You can right click to adjust the size of the brush. I'm going to twirl down general brushes and choose the hard round brush, and then for the pixel size, I've got this at 10 pixels. The hardness is at 100%. Now 10 pixels is going to look a little bit different depending on the resolution of the image. This image that I have is a 4K image, so 10 pixels will look kind of small. Now I'm going to choose a color that will stand out on the image, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see where I'm painting. And I'm going to give myself a general guideline for where this foreground layer is going to be. And then I'll mark this with an F so I know that this is for the foreground. And I'll do the same thing for the different layers. Again, this is just to help me out so I can plan how to split up the layers. Now I'm going to start using the pen tool to select the foreground layer. And before I do this, I'm going to make a copy of the original image just to be safe. And I'll work on this layer. I could turn off this reference for now. Keyboard shortcut is letter P for the pen tool. And if you click over here on the pen tool, you'll see that there are 3 different pen tools. There's the standard pen tool, which is the top one. Then you have the Freeform Pen Tool, and then you have the Curvature Pen Tool. For this, I'll show you how to do this with the pen tool. That's what I typically use, but then the Freeform Pen Tool is also a really good tool. And sometimes if you need to get something done quickly, the Freeform Pen Tool is your best option. With the standard pen tool, if you click one time, it'll create an anchor point. The second time you click, it will create another anchor point, but then it'll also have this segment in between. So if you just click, it'll be a straight line. If you click and drag, then it'll be a curved line. And you'll see that it has the little handlebars on the ends. That's the Bezier handles. And that way you can adjust the curves. You can even adjust the curves after you're done. To complete the shape, you hover over that first anchor point, and you'll see that it has the little circle icon next to the pen. If you click, it will close the shape. Now, if you choose the direct selection tool, you'd be able to go back and make adjustments on any of those handles or any of the anchor points. You can move these around. So it's important to note that you don't have to be perfect the first time you draw a shape with the pen tool. As long as you're close and you have it, and you have the general shape, you can create anchor points or delete anchor points. And if you go to the pen tool, you'll see that there's these other options here, the add anchor point, the delete anchor point, and then the convert point tool. The add anchor point tool, clearly that's for adding other points along the segment. The delete anchor point tool does exactly that. You can go in and you can delete different anchor points that you've created. And then the last one, this convert point tool, that changes things from being a curved anchor point to a straight anchor point. So you can click on this and it'll get rid of that. It'll turn both of these into straight lines. It's actually the line that's going into that anchor point. And if you wanted to do the opposite, you could click and drag and it will turn that into a curved anchor point and it'll give you handlebars. So you could go through something really quickly. Let me go to the pen tool, and you could just create a bunch of straight lines, and then you could go back later with this convert point tool and then convert those all into curved shapes if you needed to do that. I'm going to delete both of these shapes. And let's look at the other pen tool, which is the Freeform Pen Tool. If you want to cycle through the different pen tools without going over here and clicking, if you hold down Shift and press P, it will cycle through the different pen tools. So this is the standard pen tool, and this is the Freeform Pen Tool. The Freeform Pen Tool, you don't keep clicking. You only click once. As soon as you let go, it will create the anchor points based on the line that you've drawn. And just like the standard pen tool, as soon as you come back to the original anchor point, it'll give you the option to close that shape. All right, another thing with the Freeform Pen Tool is if you click and you make a shape, but you don't close it, and you let go of the mouse, and you have a gap here. To close this, you hover over the last anchor point that you made, and you'll see a little diagonal line show up. And when you see that, then you can continue drawing. So you just click and drag, and then let go of the mouse once you see the icon that tells you that you are connecting that shape. And then you can let go, and now we have a closed shape. So if we look at this last option here for the pen tools, this is the Curvature Pen Tool. And when you click and make anchor points with the Curvature Pen Tool, it just automatically makes a curved line when you click. So every anchor point is curved. All right, I'll fast forward through me making the foreground selection. Something to note when you're working with paths, you click over on the path area, and whatever path you are currently working on is called the work path. Now, if you want to save this work path to something you can bring back later, then you would go to the options here and you would say Save Path, and then give it a name. As you can see, I've made one for the foreground and for the midground. So let's talk about converting paths into selections. So the whole purpose of using the pen tool and creating these shapes is so that we can isolate areas of the screen and use that. So for this, we actually want the foreground layer here to be its own layer. And you can see that I have done that already, but let me show you how I did this. So this is a copy of the original image. I want this layer to look like this layer where it's just the foreground. So if I go into paths and I load the foreground path, I need to convert this into a selection. So if I right click on the path, I'll have an option that says Make Selection. And if I choose that right now, I have an option to make a new selection. I could add a feather if I want to, but I don't at this point. So I'm going to hit OK, and you'll see that it's converted that path into a selection. Now, it didn't delete the path in here. If I click on the foreground, you'll see that it could bring that up again. So I'm going to click away from that because I don't want to confuse myself. Right now, I have a selection. Let's say that in the selection, I notice that there's something that's incorrect. Like this line actually should go down here. There are a couple of ways to add or subtract to the selection. One way is with the Lasso Tool. If you go to the Lasso Tool, which is L, and you hold down Option, you'll see that there's a little minus, and then you can make a selection, and it will subtract that from your selection. Now, if you wanted to add to the selection, like let's say that there's an area over here, like I wanted to add this part of the tree, then I would hold down the Shift button, And when you hold down Shift, it will give you a little plus sign so you know that you're adding that area to the selection. The other way to do this is with the pen tool. And with the pen tool, you have a little bit more control and you can make more detailed areas. So if I were to go in and make something with the pen tool, now the question is, how do these interact with each other? I have one that's a selection. This is a selection over here. And then this is a path. If I right click on the path and I do make selection, you'll see now all of these show up. I can add to the selection, I can subtract from the selection, or I could have it intersect with the selection. So for now, if I click add to the selection, you'll see that it's going to add that area. And then if I wanted to make an adjustment, again, I could go to the pen tool, draw this area that I want to subtract, and then I could go to make selection, and then on this I'll hit subtract from selection. So this is another way that you can adjust your selection, and that's using the pen tool. So let's say that this selection is how I want it, but I need to get rid of everything else. So on this, I know that I have a backup, so if I need to go back and bring this original image back, I have that as a layer. So on this original copy right here, I have the foreground selected, but I need to select everything else and delete it. So I'm going to go up to select and choose inverse. I'm going to select the inverse. And now it has everything selected except for the foreground. So now I can hit delete and it will clear everything out. You can also go to edit clear and it's the same thing. It deletes everything that is selected. So the foreground image is probably the easiest one to do because there's nothing on top of it. The problem now is that the midground has the foreground on top of it. So if I pull up the selection that I made for the midground and I do make selection, we see that this has the midground, but then the foreground is also there. So we need to get rid of the foreground on this layer. So I'm going to select the foreground shape and I'll right click and I'll do make selection. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this content aware fill mode. So I'm going to go to content aware fill and it's going to look at that area that I have selected and it's going to look at the area around it to figure out what it can take from the area surrounding to fill that in. This is the result. I can see a little bit of a halo. So everything that's green, it's using to fill in this area. And everything that's selected is what it's filling. So I actually want to expand this a little bit. So I'm going to go to the Lasso Tool. And you'll see as I do that, it gives me a result over here. So everything that is green is the source to fill in what you have selected. If you want to change the source that it's using to fill in, then you go up to this brush and you can subtract parts of the screen. Like if I don't want it to use the sky, I can go in here and paint out the sky, and then it won't use the sky to fill in this area. It's going to look at the most immediate area surrounding it. So when we're done and this looks good, we need to tell it where to output this to. So instead of outputting to the current layer, I'm going to tell this to output to a duplicate layer, and then I'll hit OK. So you can see this is the layer that it made, and this is the adjusted selection area. I can deselect this because this selection was just what it was using for the content aware fill. Now it does look a little bit messy in here, but you have to remember that this is going to be behind the foreground anyway. So we might get away with this. And for this project, once we load this into After Effects, we'll have a better idea of how much cleanup work we'll need to do in Photoshop. But for now, I think this will probably work pretty well. So I'm going to go to Paths here, and I'm going to load the selection that I made for the midground, and I'll right click on this, do Make Selection. This is a new selection, and then I'll do the same thing. I want to separate this from the background. So now I'll go to Select Inverse and clear this. So I have a midground layer that's isolated and it's just by itself. And then I have a foreground layer that's in front of this. And then the last thing that I need to do is make a background layer. So I'm going to turn these off. I'll make another copy of this original file. And I'll rename this and clean this up a little bit later. This is just so you can see the process of what I'm doing. So we're going to use the content aware fill again, and we're going to get rid of this whole midground area. So on this one, I'll go back to paths, I'll select midground, do the same thing. And I'll right click on the path and I'll do make selection. And if you want to expand a selection by a certain number of pixels, then you can go up here to select, go to modify, and we're going to go to expand. And I'll expand this by maybe 5 pixels. So it expands it just a little bit. And this is just in case when I was making this, I might not have been perfect. And I might even expand this a little bit more. I'll go to select, modify, expand. And just to be safe, I'll do another 10 pixels. And then now I'm going to go into the content aware fill. And I'll do the same process. Back this out so we can see what it's looking at. Again, it's taking everything from the green and it's using that to fill in what you have selected. And here we can see that it's using the sky, and that looks pretty bad. So I need to go over here and adjust. So I need to go over here and make sure that the sky is not being included. And then it'll take a minute and update. This doesn't look wonderful, but it's a pretty good starting point, and it does save a lot of time as opposed to using the... And it does save a lot of time instead of going in and cloning everything by hand. And it looks like we're probably going to need to do a little bit of cleanup work by hand. You know, this ridge back here gets duplicated quite a bit. So I might even eliminate that from this ridge from being part of the pattern that it's using. So I'll go in here and paint that out. And then now it won't use that to fill in. And again, this might look a little bit sloppy, but it also might be just enough. This might also be just enough for us to work with. I'm going to make sure that output 2 is on duplicate layer, and I'll hit. All right, now I have copy 5, and this will be I'm going to clean this up a little bit, because right now I only need a foreground layer and a midground layer and a background layer. I have too many layers, so I'm going to delete the ones that I don't need. Okay, so these are the layers that I need. 1, my foreground. 2, my midground. 3, my background. So these are the layers that we need. We need them to be isolated, because once we go into After Effects, it's going to be so much easier to work with these if they are isolated like this. We want to hold on to the original just as backup. And again, the reference layer, this was just helpful for me working inside of Photoshop. We probably won't need this in After Effects, but I'm going to keep it just in case. So this is what your Photoshop file should look like when you're ready to export to After Effects.